making peace with food. This is a good one.
Yeah.
Do you want to start? Do you do something you're burning to begin with?
Sure. So, if you're just joining on, Alana and I are doing the 10 Principles of Intuitive Eating little by little. My name is Beth Moore. I am a intuitive eating health coach and fitness enthusiast. We picked each principle one at a time because it's important to, although you don't have to follow them in the order, it does help develop your skills as an intuitive eater if you do one step at a time. So on this month, we are on making peace with food, which can be one of the most challenging ones, especially if you come from a diet background, because food has been the enemy for a long time. So I'm very excited to talk about this, and I'll let Alana introduce herself.
Yep, I'm Alana, and I am from Freedom with Food and Fitness, and I am an intuitive eating coach, and just kind of a supporter of women who want to stop dieting. I have a couple of courses out now. I have the website finally up and running at freedomwithfoodandfitness.com. I have the book almost completed, which is very exciting, like an interactive workbook for those who want to start or continue their intuitive eating journey. And that is me. And in about 2 weeks, I'll be back to being a high school English teacher also. So yay.
That's the day job.
So something I was thinking about this morning that I wanted to make sure that we touched upon with this principle of making peace with food is this idea that it's not only making peace with food physically, like allowing all foods physically, but it's also mentally making peace with food. And I think that's really the larger component, is this idea that, if you're allowing yourself cookies and brownies and whatever it is that you've been dying to reintroduce, that's all well and good. But if when you're doing it, it's producing anxiety for you, then there's still some work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I actually, on my blog, on my website about this subject, one of the first questions I ask is, how often do you think about food? And most dieters' thought process about food is something that can be very consuming. I know when I was dieting, I would be in the middle of eating something and already be thinking about what's my next meal, because I was never eating enough to be truly satisfied. So if you're at home and you're struggling with getting past diet culture and developing the skills of becoming an intuitive eater, that might be something that you realize is a trigger. Just ask yourself, how often do I actually think about food and eating? And if you notice it's kind of a consuming thought, that can be a big siren warning that there's an issue with our relationship with food. And that's why this principle is so important, because it's something that can truly almost paralyze us with food to the point where you're scared of eating because we're so afraid of what it's going to do to our bodies.
Yeah, and I think that's one of maybe the last kind of healing components, this preoccupation with food, because I think part of it, at least it was for me, it's something that lingered for a very long time, is because your body's still kind of afraid that you're not going to feed it as much as it should. So even if you ate enough in a meal and you ate a meal that left you full and satiated, because you're still learning, your body's still learning to trust you, you might still think about that next meal as you're finishing that meal that you're currently eating, because your body and your mind are just worried that you're not going to give yourself that next meal. So that's like a totally normal part of the process for sure.
And if you were with us last month, Alana commented on a study that was done in the mid-1900s on grown men who were deprived of food. And since then, even there have been dozens and dozens of studies on deprivation, especially with food. And anytime we deprive ourselves of something, that only heightens our desire to want it more. And if you read that study, either in Alana's upcoming book or on her webpage, or I reference the study as well on my webpage, powell.com, you'll see that they were just normal people, but once they were restricted, all they could think about was food, recipes, eating, because it heightened that desire to eat more. So the longer you restrict on diets, the more consuming food thoughts will become. And that's where that cycle that you'll hear a lot of intuitive eaters talk about, restrict, binge, gain, repeat, restrict, binge, gain, repeat. Because the more you restrict, the more you're going to be consumed with that food thought.
Yeah, and for those of you who maybe want to take a look at that study, because the study is super interesting, it's the Minnesota starvation diet, and it was with I think it was like 32 men, and they cut the men's calories in half, but that was still, when it was cut in half, it was 1,600 calories, and I hate to throw numbers around, but for a lot of women, that's what like a nutritionist or a dietitian or a weight loss program will put you on, something around that range. So to see what that range can actually do to a person when they're not supposed to be eating that little is very interesting. And like you were saying, they were looking at recipes, and these are men that didn't cook. Like these were men that said that they did not cook, they did not have a preoccupation with cooking and recipes before the experiment. So again, like you said, whatever you resist persists. So you don't give yourself food, you're going to think about food all the time. And it's so against our nature to, after a binge, want to continue to eat, but that's the exact thing that gets you out of the cycle. So it's almost like you have to force yourself to do something that seems quote unquote unnatural
Yeah.
for you. That's the scary part.
Yeah. And I came up with four things, and Alana probably has more or can add to them, of things that making peace with food should be the foundation of this principle. Number one is to get rid of the idea that there are good and bad foods. So many of us label certain foods, specifically refined foods, as bad, and sometimes we view them as morally bad, like I cannot eat them or I have to work out to gain it. It is something that has big restrictions. And then more whole foods, we label them as good. I can eat as much as I want because it's a good food. So the first thing I think is the most important is to get rid of labeling foods as morally good or morally bad. Number two is to stop feeling guilt or shame in relation to food. So anytime maybe you eat, Alana mentioned this on the last two, and I love when she talks about it, the slutty brownies that she has in her freezer.
I had one. I had one. Was it last night? The night before. Just so you know.
And most people, when they would eat something like that afterwards, for some reason, we're overwhelmed with guilt and shame because we ate something that was delicious. So stop guilting yourself over eating something, because food should be an experience and it's meant to be enjoyed, not shamed. Number three, Alana already commented on this, but allowing yourself unconditional permission to eat what you crave and when you crave it. And I will put this plug in here. Unconditional is defined as not subject to any conditions. So at any point, if you start thinking, well, this food is on my back, that's a condition. You have to step back from that. Unconditional permission. And then the last one, I thought it was learn what foods you actually like and what foods make you feel good. Sometimes we've been labeling foods good and bad for so long. When we feel like we want that cheat meal, we'll eat anything on the bad list just because it makes us feel like we're serving ourselves in some way. But then we might be like, I didn't even really like that meal, or we didn't even feel good after we ate it physically, and emotionally it did nothing for us. So start learning what foods you actually like and don't just eat them because they're on the no-no list or the yes list.
That's so funny you said that, because I commented on somebody else's post this morning about that. Like, if you don't want the cupcake, you don't have to have it just because like you're allowing all foods, and that's typically considered a bad food. So I have to eat the cupcake in order to be eating intuitively. Like I personally, I don't like donuts. Like you will never find me at a Krispy Kreme because I just like, I would rather or something else. So like if a donut's in front of me, I'm not gonna be like, oh my God, I have to eat it because I'm eating intuitively. Like I just don't want it. God, there's so many things that you said that I want to talk about. The only condition I would add to foods is if you have some sort of dietary or like allergy thing. But yeah, no, like there should be no conditions. Um, this whole idea of good versus bad. When we label foods as good and bad, we're talking from a health standpoint, from what diet culture is telling us. But if we kind of flip that narrative and say, what about like good in terms of celebratory, or good in terms of honoring my culture? Like good can take on a totally different form if you allow it to. So cake is bad, but if cake is like this celebratory like milestone, like my son just turned 1, like that cake was good because it's like it solidified a memory. You know what I mean? Oh, and it also tastes good. So, and the last thing I actually want to point out, because I'm an English teacher, this whole idea of like shoulds and foods that are like decadent and kind of give us that sense of pleasure. From a purely historical standpoint, like the country was founded by Puritans. Like for anyone who's from the United States, we're puritanicals, and Puritans were very like no music, no sex, no pleasure. Like pleasure was a bad thing because they believed in a very like fire and brimstone God. So I think that that type of puritanical thought process is kind of carried on even to today, even the way people like don't want to talk about sex. You know what I mean? Like the fact that 50 Shades of Grey blew up the way that it did told me that there are a lot of like very sexually repressed people that live in the country. So yeah, this whole idea of, oh, you can't have it because it's like it's pleasureful and it's good, like that's bad. I think there's a little historical backlog on that one.
Yeah, you mentioned like donuts and cupcakes and stuff. I think we've all been there when you've been at an event and there's cupcakes and you feel like you want to splurge, so you have it and then it's dry and not good. And yet for some reason, we're still like the store-bought kind. We still finish it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with not finishing food on your plate. If something is not good just because you picked it up, you do not have to eat it. So if
Yep.
you're in the middle of, and I have this conversation with my husband all the time, he's like, it's not that good. And I'm like, then stop eating it. If you don't enjoy food, you do not have to eat it. There's nothing wrong with putting away food. The food is either going to end up in the trash can or in your belly. Your belly is not a trash can. Don't treat it as such. Honor
Yes.
your body by filling it with foods that are nourishing for you and foods that you actually enjoy.
I did that yesterday. Actually, we had a professional development day for work, and they had like a breakfast spread of the bagels and the fruit, and there was like this cake on top that looked interesting. I'd never seen anything that looked like it before, so I took a piece of it and I took one bite of it, and I was just like, no. Even though like it like tasted good, but it tasted like so sugary that I was like, this isn't really my deal, and I threw it out, and I felt bad about it, and that's something I think that's something that we need to discuss with making peace with food is this idea of food insecurity that some people have, that some people maybe have grown up with. Um, Food insecurity, for those of you who don't know, is when you grow up and you maybe don't have enough food in the house, or you had a parent that restricted you in some way. It doesn't have to be like a socioeconomic thing. It could just be like a parent or somebody who was telling you you weren't allowed to eat. And because of that food insecurity, because you didn't know when your next meal was coming from, a lot of us have trouble throwing away food. So I try as much as I can to either like put it in the fridge for another time. Maybe I'll want it a couple of days later, you know, as long as it doesn't go bad, or, you know, I'll try to repurpose it or freeze it or do something, pawn it off on my husband or my son. But that is something I'll be like, sometimes I do struggle with this idea of throwing food out is very difficult for a lot of people, but I think it's a necessary step toward recovery, is making peace with the idea that you know, we do the best we can in terms of waste, but sometimes it's just, like you said, like you shouldn't make yourself the trash can if, you know, if that's the only alternative to actually putting it in the trash.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's big too. I know I've got several clients who grew up with finish your plate. I know I grew up in that time period where your parents would always say, "There's hungry children overseas, finish your plate." But you know what? When we're little, if you watch little kids, they typically tend to be grazers, and they eat when they're hungry, and they know when they're full and they want to stop eating.
Mm-hmm.
It's us as the adults that are always like pushing them, like, "You need to eat. You haven't eaten in so long," or keep eating, finish your plate. But they know we have an innate nature that tells us, I'm hungry, I'm full.
Mm-hmm.
And so making peace with food has a lot to do with that. It's almost like we have to go back to being childlike in our eating mindset, because we have to reset these rules and restrictions we put on ourselves for years and learn, you know what, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat something. I'm full, I'm not going to have the second serving. And understanding that that is okay. And it comes into every aspect of life. If you're out to dinner with friends and they're still eating and you're full, you don't have to keep eating with them. Or on the flip side, if they're not eating and you're hungry, it's okay to eat. You can be the only one in the room eating, and there's no shame in that, because that means you are honoring your hunger, your body, and that's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. it's something that I think a lot of women struggle with, this idea of eating more or more than their husband, but like I do it all the time, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not like a value that you should be placing on who you are as a person. It doesn't make you a glutton. It doesn't make you anything. It just makes you hungry. And I think what you said about, kind of tapping into our inner child, I think a lot of inner child work needs to be done with this type of healing, this idea that, how would you treat you as a 3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, if a 3-year-old or 4-year-old was hungry, you wouldn't be like, well, you need to wait the 2 hours before your set meal time, right? You would, or if they, I don't know, messed up somehow, would you berate them, or would you give them like grace and compassion and say like, it's okay, we mess up all the time? So I think there is a lot of inner child work that needs to be done. So channeling your inner child in order to make peace with food, I think, is a great idea. And it's something I struggle with sometimes in my head with Archer, is this idea that like, last night I gave him string beans, didn't want it. Gave him tofu, didn't want it. Gave him corn, didn't want it. All he wanted were these little like white cheddar broccoli puffs. They're just puffs, I don't know. And I was like, that's all he wanted for dinner. And I'm thinking in my head, like, but then I'm like, no, it's okay. That's what he wants. That's what his body is telling him he wants. Just give it to him. And that's all he had were these puffs. And he's alive today. So it's fine.
Yeah, no drama.
Yep.
I
So yeah,
think
I think this is probably one of the hardest, because I feel like with ditching the diet mentality, I think it's easy to pick it out now, and feeling your hunger. I think for most of us, unless we're very, very disordered, I think you can feel your hunger and honor your hunger. But I think making peace with the food, like mentally, I think that's one of the hardest ones.
yeah, yeah, and I wanted to touch a little bit too on like Last Supper style eating. We know when we come from diet backgrounds, we've all been there. We're on Saturday or Sunday night. We're like, you know what? I'm starting Monday. I'm gonna eat whatever I want tonight because I have to restrict starting Monday. And I think we've all been there too. You do really good on Monday, Tuesday, and then by Wednesday it's like right back where you were. Why? Because we're not programmed to binge eat and then restrict for long periods of time. How much better would it be if you honored all foods, allowed all foods, and ate more across the board in a regulatory line rather than huge splurges and then big drop in restrictions? And that's what making peace is all about. Making peace with food is all about, is being able to honor food of all sorts so we don't get to that uncomfortable binge setting, but we also don't find that blood sugar drop when we're restricting, and we're finding health and nourishment, which is really, people think intuitive eating, they think, oh, all you're going to do is eat this, cookies and cakes. But we honor our health. That is a huge, huge part of intuitive eating. And binge eating is not honoring our health. And when we come from disordered eating backgrounds, we all suffer from it. I've been there too. I'm not saying it with any judgment. I'm saying it with a lot of compassion because I want to help others get past that. And I Last Supper ate so many times, and I never, ever, ever felt good afterward, not emotionally or physically.
Well, that's the thing too, is that and not that we're in the business of eating as little as possible, but really on average, you will probably eat less of whatever that food was if you had just honored your hunger and made peace with that food the first time, instead of like restricting, thinking about it, and then all of a sudden like letting loose and just shoving it all in your mouth, and then feeling guilty, having that Last Supper mentality, being like, well, I'm never going to allow myself this food again because obviously I can't control myself around it, so I'm going to shove more in my mouth. And I think we deal with the Last Supper mentality the most around the holidays, because that's the food that we don't typically eat. So it's like when Thanksgiving rolls around, it's that one time of the year that a lot of people allow themselves pie and cookies and whatever other goodies are coming out, and they feel like, well, after today I can't eat any of this, and after today I need to go on a diet because I'm eating a lot today because it's Thanksgiving. And that's when it happens. So if you allow those foods often, and whenever you want them, you don't end up feeling that way. And I've seen it a million times, a million people have put it up, but it's like that graphic where it's like Monday through Sunday of like all the little emoji icons of food, and it's like salad, 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 pizza, ice cream, blah 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 blah. But if you just intersperse like the salad, the ice cream, the this, like the veggie and the pizza, blah blah blah, it's more well rounded. It's not this like strict and then binge, strict and then binge.
Yeah, and if you're coming from that kind of background, I do just want to say consider that there's only 7 days in a week. So if you're binge eating 3 days of the week, that's almost 50% of your week is binge eating without honoring what your body really wants. So keep that in mind if you're oh, I did really good throughout the week, but the weekend is my playtime. Are you really honoring your health and what your body truly needs in eating in that style? Because the majority of your diet is still coming from foods that your body might not be processing very well. So that's a big part of making peace with food too. How much better would it be, like Alana mentioned, if we just dispersed it throughout and allowed our body to digest things well throughout the week rather than cramming it full of a bunch of stuff in 2 days that it has to try to work itself through.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a lot of, I think it's something to be said that there's a lot of trial and error in this. Like the other day, my husband thought it was freaking crazy. So what did I have? We made this like ground turkey, Southwestern veggie mix thing for dinner, and I wanted chips on the side. And we have two different types of tortilla chips in the house. We have salted and unsalted. So when I put together my meal and put the chips on the side, I got the salted ones because that's what I was craving in the moment. But then once I was done with like the meat and veggie thing, that had a lot of salts already in it. And I took one salted chip and I was like, I really don't want this. Like, this feels like it just doesn't feel good to me. So like I like dumped those chips back in the bag and then got the unsalted ones. He's like, what the hell are you doing? I was like, I don't want those right now. And I had another instance last night where I thought we went on a walk after dinner. It was really hot out. So when I got home, I was hot and I was like, I'm going to make like a bowl of ice cream as my dessert because I need something to cool down. But by the time like I gave him a bath and like my body cooled down on its own and I went to go get the ice cream out, I was like, I'm not really that hot anymore. I don't really want ice cream. I want cookie dough. So like, even though I'd already made a bowl of ice cream, I like put it back in the freezer and grabbed the cookie dough instead. And like, it's trial and error. Like you might think you want something and then decide you don't. It's okay to put that away, grab something else. Like you said before, you don't have to like force feed yourself it because you said you were going to have it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's big. I know when I started my intuitive eating journey, there would be several times ice cream is like one of my favorite treats. And I would go to the freezer and I would go to get it because it was after dinner and it was dessert time. And then I would think to myself, I'm kind of full. I don't really want it. And I would have to play this game with picking out of the freezer and putting it back and like deciding do it. So when Alana says trial and error, you do kind of have to, you'll hear it also called like mindful eating. You kind of have to check in with yourself because we're so programmed to just do these routine things, and we think after dinner I have to have dessert. And there's nothing wrong with that if you want it. But if you don't really want it, you don't have to eat it. It's okay to go to bed without having something sweet. So just
That was really hard for me. That was a really hard one for me because I'm such a creature of habit, and I always 99% of the time want something sweet after dinner before I go to bed. But like sometimes if we go out to dinner, and I typically eat more when I'm out to dinner, and I come home, I'm like, all right, well it's dessert time, and then I'm like, but I'm so full. Like, why would I do that to myself? Because I'm only gonna feel overly stuffed. So then I'm like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to have the dessert if you don't want it. Like, it's still going to be in your freezer tomorrow. So just have it tomorrow. Have it tomorrow in midday if you want to. Like, there's no timing for dessert.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I've also heard making peace with food, which I love this saying, is legalizing food, which because we're going to get to the step of challenging food police. So I like that those two go together. Because sometimes we really have so different foods off limits that it is almost like we have to make it legal. Like it's like so off limits, it's bad. And that's when we start to get those guilt and shame feelings with it too. And the reason we're getting together and want to talk to you guys is because we really want you to not feel guilt and shame over eating something. We have so many things in life to worry and stress about. Food should not be one of them.
Well, it's this idea of like, when you catch yourself saying, oh, I should eat that or I shouldn't eat that, shoulds are all things that somebody else or society has put on you. So it's almost like a question you have to ask yourself, are you living for other people or are you living for you? Because if you're living in a world of shoulds, then you're living for other people. If you're living in a world of want, you're living for yourself. So that's another thing you really have to think about when you're like making peace with food.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would think the majority of us would say in life, we don't really want other people making a lot of rules for us. So don't allow diet culture, which a lot of the apps and stuff that we see out there were created by men. And I don't mean men as in mankind, I mean physical men. And they're telling women what to look like and what to do. So, because I saw one intuitive eater, she made a post, and all these apps, MyFitnessPal, all this stuff, were designed by men. And a lot of the time, who do we see in diet culture? It's women. So don't allow somebody else to set your standards for you. Set the standards for yourself because only you know what your body needs and wants. Alana and I are here to guide and help you all along your journey, but it is your journey. And so you have to see what do I really need? What do I really want? Because I can't tell you when you're hungry. I can't tell you what you're craving. So it's important that you get to take those moments of looking inward rather than constantly projecting out and see what you really want.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of leave it with this idea that to make peace with food is just like stop being at war with it. Like it's something that we have to put in our bodies. It's not something we should be fighting. Like if you stop the fight, because I'm sure everybody who's listening is exhausted of it, like just make peace with it. Just say, I'm gonna eat. I'm gonna eat. And just like I made a post the other day, like it takes one day. Like one day I literally, and I mean, I had been listening to intuitive eating and body positivity podcasts for months at that point, but like I just like woke up one day and I was like, I'm not gonna get on the scale. I'm just gonna see what happens today. I'm gonna see, like, is my world gonna explode? And it didn't. And I actually felt really good that whole day that I didn't weigh myself because I wasn't like on a high of being less weight or like depressed that I weighed more. So it's like, you know what? I'm going to do this another day and see if I can do it again and do it again and do it again. And then eventually I just didn't want to weigh myself. Same thing with counting calories. I like just one day I woke up and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do like one day where I don't track. And like nothing bad happened. I didn't become 600 pounds. I didn't, eat all the cookies. I was like, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. So it's this whole idea of just like making peace with food, but recommitting to that peace every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last comment I want to say, because you mentioned about counting calories. If you come from that background, I'll let you know from my experience, a lot of us know what kind of calories are in food because we've been tracking for so long. So you might notice that you're doing it in your mind still, but keep being mindful about it because that was something that was hard for me. I would be like, you know what, this many calories are in peanut butter and blah, blah, blah. It does get easier. I don't think that way when I grab peanut butter anymore. I don't think that way when I make some eggs. So at first you might still be thinking in the back of your mind, but keep being mindful about, you know what, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. And I promise you, over time, you won't be viewing food as a number anymore. That will come along your journey. Just be patient with yourself. It's not going to stop overnight because your diet didn't start overnight. So be patient with yourself on your journey.
Right. Very well said. Very, very good end. Oh, well, it's good seeing you.
You too. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and again, so we have Beth Moore of Play, Eat, Live Well, Pel Well, and then I am Alana from Freedom with Food and Fitness. Follow us both, check us out, DM us any questions, and we can answer them the next time. And the next principle is principle number 4, and that is challenging the food police. So that is diet mentality in your head. So that's next time.
All right, I'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.